is our presenter tonight from the Bionutrient Food Association. Kris McCue? Yes, Kris McCue. And she'll tell us all about seeds.
So hi, welcome everyone. As you said, I am Kris McCue. I am the leader of the Hartford area chapter of the Bionutrient Food Association. And for those of you who haven't heard of us, we are a nationally recognized educational nonprofit organization that is working to increase quality in the food supply by restoring the quality of our soil. We work with gardeners and farmers to help them implement biological practices into their growing systems, and we also work with consumers, grocers, restaurant owners, chefs, anyone who wants to know how to identify and be able to find sources of higher quality foods. When I'm talking about higher quality foods, I'm talking about high-brix foods, foods that test out to be producing a higher level of nutrition, and that is going to come from really healthy, biologically active soils. I am a home gardener. I come from a home gardening family, no farming in my background. My family always gardened. My mom and my grandparents always had a garden in the summer, and everything they grew was, I would say, conventional. They rototilled every spring, bare ground everywhere, nice straight lines of, the tomatoes, the onions, the peppers. Everything was doused liberally with Miracle-Gro all summer long. That was their fertilizer of choice. And then in the late summer and early fall, they would harvest things and boil them in water bath can and freeze and make spaghetti sauce. And all of these things would be fed back to us in the wintertime. So as a child, I don't really remember being welcome to go into the garden and just pick things and eat them. It had to be put away for wintertime. So I don't think I really knew a whole lot about vegetables. To me, vegetables were just a necessary evil when I was a child. And then when I was 13, I got my first job at the George Hall Organic Farm here in Simsbury. And I was selling the produce at the fruit and vegetable stand. And it was kind of funny because I had no idea what most of the things were that I was selling. I had no idea tomatoes came in so many varieties, or lettuce. I don't think I had ever seen kale or Swiss chard. And I wasn't real clear on zucchini and yellow squash. Didn't really know what those were. But I ate everything, and I learned to really appreciate good quality, good tasting vegetables and fruits. And I knew that when I was able to start gardening on my own, that was the kind of food that I wanted to grow. I wanted my food to taste like what George was growing. So fast forward to 1985, and I was able to start my first garden. And I would characterize my early gardening years as organic by neglect. I had no idea what to do. I didn't know anything about soil health. I just knew that I wasn't going to use Miracle-Gro. The color was so off-putting, I don't even know what that stuff is. And when you look at fertilizer packages, I didn't know what the ingredients were. None of it smelled right, and so I just decided, I'm not using any of that. In the beginning stages of gardening, things went okay. I planted just a few things to start out. But each year, the amount that I was able to harvest out of my garden became less and less. And the weeds became more and more. And then in 1995, I moved to the house where I live now, and again, I started up a new patch of ground as a garden. No rototilling again, and again, no fertilizing, but I started composting. I was taking books out of the library and trying to learn how can I be more successful with my gardening. So again, didn't know really what I was doing with the composting. I would call myself a lazy composter because I would just throw it all out in a heap in the yard and hope that maybe a year from then I would have something that resembled soil, and then I could, amend my garden with that, whatever the animals hadn't eaten. So at least I was adding something to my soil, and I was adding, yard inputs, the grass clippings and leaves and that type of thing. So some nutrients were going back into my soil, but it really wasn't enough. And I discovered in this new garden at the house where I still live, I could never grow slicing tomatoes, the full-size tomatoes. I could grow the cherry or grape-sized tomatoes, and I could not grow root crops at all. No carrots, no beets, no radishes. And I thought, this is really ridiculous. They give nursery school children little packages of radish seeds, and they can grow them. What's wrong with me? I cannot get these things to grow. And I was always drawn to the older heirloom varieties, and people were saying, no, you can't grow those things, they don't work, try the modern, try the hybrids. So I tried everything, including the more modern hybrid varieties, and I just could not get my root crops to grow. So then In, was about 2013, I met David Forster, who was the agronomist for the Bionutrient Food Association. And he asked, have you ever had your soil tested? I had never heard of having my soil tested, so I sent out a sample to Logan Labs in Ohio, which is a lab that BFA works with and that we recommend. And when the results came back, I discovered that I had excellent levels of calcium in my soil, but I had critically low boron and sulfur and certain other of the mineral elements. And what I had no idea of at that time was that even though I had excellent levels of calcium, and calcium is the mineral that's needed for pretty much every function that a plant has, without boron, that calcium could not move up into my plant. The calcium was not available to my plant. So David, being the soil chemist, the agronomist for the BFA, he helped me to source natural rock minerals to get these mineral elements back into my soil. So that year, that was May of 2014, I had my first test done. I remineralized my soil with these missing elements, and then I replanted the root crops. In October of 2014, for the very first time ever, I harvested really respectable looking carrots and beets and radishes. And I knew this was it. I had finally found what I'd been looking for, this biological approach to growing better quality food. So David needed to move out of town. His wife got relocated with her job, and so in 2015, it was late in the year, he asked if I and a friend of mine, Mark Sigelski, would take over the Hartford area chapter, which he had actually started. And Mark and I both felt like we were home gardeners and we were still such novices and learning so much about the soil chemistry and the soil biology, we didn't want to have that come to an end. So we said, yep, we'll take this on. And we knew that we needed to have a place where we could continue our learning in a hands-on method, but also have a place where the people who were meeting with us could come and look and see what we were talking about. So we went to the George Hall farm and we talked to farmer Darren Hall. And he was very generous and welcoming and pretty much pointed out in the field and said, what would you like? So we ended up with a 4,000 square foot plot in the middle of the field at Old Farms Road here in Simsbury. And in January of 2016, we broke ground. It was a section of the field that had been heavily farmed for many years. It was highly compacted soil. It really felt like concrete. We knew we were not going to rototill because we didn't want to kill any biology that was alive and working in the soil. But we knew that we needed to get some air and some water channels in there, and we needed to get some minerals. We took a soil sample and sent it out to find out what the deficiencies were, and we started working with a broad fork just to get some, puncture some holes in there to get some air and some water down in there. And there's a photo collage over here to my right that you can take a look at after the program, and that shows the progression of our biological demonstration garden. We are still running it. This will be our third season coming up, and I'm going to have open garden hours this year throughout the summer, every Tuesday afternoon from 2 o'clock until dark. If anyone wants to come and check out the garden and ask questions and taste things, you're welcome to stop by. So, as most of you probably realize, most of the food available to us today that we're purchasing in the stores is really deficient in nutrients. Our soils are very deficient in the mineral nutrients, which is why a lot of us are trying to grow our own foods. But what I didn't really learn back in biology was that there's this whole holistic system in place in the soil if you look out in nature. And when I talk about biological growing, that's what I'm talking about, replicating, copying exactly what goes on in nature. We have a microbiome that, we hear a lot about how we need to feed our microbiome certain foods and we need to eat probiotics. And our soil has the same sort of system in place where you've got bacteria and fungi and all these little organisms along with the worms that are basically the digestive system for the plants. So it stands to reason that if our soils are deficient in these mineral nutrients and the biology, and they're creating plants that we're eating that are deficient in these nutrients, the seeds that are coming from those plants are also most likely to be deficient in nutrients. So one of the things that I'm going to repeat a lot is selecting for quality. All the different things that you can do along the way where you can bump up the quality of your seed stock or the seed stock that you may be, like myself, saving your own seeds and sharing with other people. So the biological growing that I'm talking about goes by many other names. You may have heard of regenerative farming, carbon farming, restoration farming. These are all the same types of principles where we're talking about replicating what goes on out in nature. You probably know a lot of this, but I'm going to go over it anyway because this is a gardening group. But so seeds are designed by nature to perform certain functions and to reach a certain potential. Some of the things that we do in our seed starting pretty much limits the full potential that that plant could have reached if it was just settled out in nature. Out in nature, the seeds are growing on the plant throughout the summer. In the fall, the plant dies back, and in the early winter, the seed is released, and it may travel a little on the wind or animals before it hits the ground. But once the seed hits the ground, that's where it stays. It does not get transplanted. Nobody pots it up, and nobody moves it around. It stays in that spot, and it goes dormant for the winter. And then in the spring, when the soil temperature conditions and the air temperature conditions are right, the seed knows when it's time to germinate and start to grow. And again, once it starts growing, that's it. Unless something eats it, nobody moves it. So there's one huge difference that we have in when we start seeds. We get the seed catalogs in the mailbox in December and January, and we're dying to plant something. And so by the end of January, early February, we've probably got out the peat pots and the trays and the plastic and the potting soil, and we're starting our seeds. And we end up with these seedlings that are a little too big for the little pots they're in, but the temperature, the weather, it's still winter, can't plant these things. So we pot them up, and then maybe we'll pot them up again before they actually get outside. Each time you move that seedling, you are limiting it from reaching its full natural potential, because in nature, it is not designed to be moved around like that. When you have your little seedling in a pot or containment of some sort, as it starts to grow and spreads out its roots, the minute those roots touch an obstacle, such as the walls of the pot, it is a signal to that seedling to stop growing or to slow down its growth. So you've now limited its growth trajectory. You've slowed it down. All that transplanting, depending on how many times you've had to do it, potting up, when you are finally able to put it outside, oftentimes we put them out a little bit earlier than we should just because they're getting so big and we need to get them out of the house. So we put them out when the soil is maybe not quite warm enough, and everyone has heard of transplant shock. Again, you've limited the growth potential that your plant could have reached. You've slowed down the whole process. So these are different things that you need to be aware of along the steps of the way, and try and limit in how many ways you're setting back your plants. In the full growth potential, one of the things, I had this really great chart, but now I can't find it, of course, I have too much stuff on my table. One of the things I've learned there's a gentleman named John Kemp at Advancing Eco-Agriculture, and he has made this really terrific pyramid chart that shows the growth of a plant, and when it reaches certain stages of photosynthesis, it produces certain nutritional compounds. I equate it to the human immune system. Plants are capable of producing these secondary metabolites at higher and higher levels, and each level that they attain means that they are able to fend off certain pathogens. Like with us, if your immune system is working really, really well, and you go into a room full of people who are sick and have the flu and coughing and whatnot, you may not get sick. You may not even get a cold, but someone else who walks in there is going to get every germ and be really sick. Our plants have a similar immune system type function, and when they're producing these secondary metabolites at a high level, they will not succumb to mildews and pest pressure. They will not be consumed by insects. They will not get the powdery mildew and the downy mildew and other, what we call flesh-eating bacteria, because that's basically what that is. I also know through experience, a few years, maybe 5 years ago, I was purchasing a produce from a farm here in Connecticut that had been working on balancing their soil and working on their soil biology for about 4 or 5 years at that point. And I had bought a bunch of bagged baby salad greens from them. And one of the bags got pushed to the back of the refrigerator, and I found it a good 2+ weeks later. And I thought, oh, great. Now, well, there was a great waste of money because, when you get bagged baby salad greens, if you don't eat them within 4 or 5 days, you've got slime in the bag. These salad greens look like I had just picked them, and I'm not joking. One thing that I have learned is that these plants, when they're producing these higher levels of nutrition, they don't rot. They don't succumb to these basically flesh-eating, rotting bacteria type things. They slowly dry out. They just desiccate. So the higher nutritional levels that you're achieving in the crops you're growing means longer term that you'll be able to use it. You don't have to worry about things going bad. You'll be able to, even the root storage crops and the squashes and things like that, they'll last you much longer through the winter season. Another thing that I've learned, when the plants are producing these high levels of nutrition, they're basically putting a lot of sugars and minerals into the sap of the plant, and these things act as antifreeze. So plants that are producing these higher levels of secondary metabolites and nutrients will not freeze as early, or they will not die from the colder temperatures. It takes a much deeper frost or freeze to kill these plants. The agronomist, or the former leader of this chapter, had moved to Upper New York State, and he put in a garden when he moved there and had all the usual things planted. And he said that he was picking tomatoes up through the end of November and into the beginning of December because his plants were growing in soil that he was really addressing the biology, and he had started the remineralizing process after a soil test. And he was also doing foliar sprays because when your soil cools down at the end of the summer, when fall comes and it's getting colder, the biology in the soil slows down. So your plants are not being fed as much by the living entities in the soil. And that's when he was really careful about foliar spraying on a regular basis to keep the nutrient levels up for the plants. And he was able to pick tomatoes that were ripening right up into December. I think that is something that we here in New England should really be looking into, because when we're putting a little baby seedling into the ground so early in the spring when it's still too cold out, it's like throwing a child outside in the winter without, the proper coat and snowsuit and whatnot. You just wouldn't do that. And it really limits the potential of growth for that plant. Whereas if we put it out a little bit later when the soil is warmer, so that the growth conditions are just to its liking, it's going to hit the ground running and grow fantastically. And as long as we can keep the nutrients available for it through the whole season, we can extend our season on the other end. This is like my personal challenge to myself. I want to be the one who's picking tomatoes in the first week of December. This is my goal. So we need to be talking about selecting for quality. At each step of the way with your seed starting operations, you can bump up the quality of the seeds and also of the plants that you'll then be able to grow. One of the things that I've learned in doing a little bit of research, I have some friends that have a school. It's called the Institute of Sustainable Nutrition. It's at Holcomb Farm in Granby. And one of the owners, Nigel Palmer is his name, he had talked about seed test weight. And actually the founder of the BFA, his name is Dan Kittredge, he is a lifelong organic farmer. He had also talked about seed test weight. So I started looking into this because I wasn't seeing that phrase in any of my seed catalogs. So when I looked into it, I discovered that there's a seed pedigree. And some of you here may know a lot more about this than I do, about the seed breeding programs and the pedigrees, or the levels of quality of our seed supply. Commercial seed production and distribution relies on sorting by seed test weight, also known as high bulk density. Graders in the seed industry assign the seed pedigree as follows. Here in the United States, first they take out the highest quality seeds for the breeding stock. Then the next level of seed is foundation, then registered, and then certified. The certified seed is what is available to farmers. Now, I don't know about you, I'm not a farmer. I'm a home gardener. So what exactly is in these packages that I'm buying in my catalogs and in local stores? It's somewhere around the 5th level once they've selected out all these higher quality seeds. So we are already starting out at a disadvantage. Up in Canada, they have breeder seed, then select, then foundation, then registered, and then certified. Their certified seed is the 5th level of seed, and that's what goes to their farmers. So if I was ordering any seeds from Canada, I'm getting somewhere around the 6th or 7th cut of the seeds. Again, they've limited my potential to grow the best quality plants. What I discovered on a site for the genetics and the breeding programs, it said high test weight indicates strong visual appeal and plant vigor and higher yields. Low test weight may indicate intolerance of weathering, insect damage, defoliation, or heat stress. Seed density is passed on with genetics. So if you're starting out with inferior quality seeds, those are the genes that will carry forward in the plants that you are growing. And you can certainly improve the quality as you go along by addressing the quality of how you're growing your seeds in the soil. But I kind of like to start out at a higher level and not have as far to climb with bumping up my quality. So I called about 9 different seed companies. I have an assortment of seed catalogs up here you can look at later. I took it upon myself to call about 9 different seed companies, and this is probably about 4 or 5 years ago, because I wanted to find out what exactly are they selling me? What is in these packages? I wanted to know more about this seed test weight. How are they choosing these seeds that they're selling to me with their name on them? Well, nobody that answered the phone at the seed companies had any idea what seed test weight was. They said that they chose based upon germination. They were looking for germination rates of 90% or better, but nobody knew what I was talking about with the seed test weight. They did say that their criteria for seeds, their number one was the germination. They also, some of them were concerned whether it was certified organic or conventional. Some of them wanted to know if they were non-GMO, if the grower had taken the Safe Seed Pledge, or if they were part of the Open Source Seed Initiative. I was also told that I could look online or in their catalogs for a page that had seed specs or seed specifications. So when I looked there, I discovered that they didn't call it seed test weight, but they told about how many seeds per given weight in particular varieties. So I looked up the Provider Green bush beans, and it was seeds per ounce. And I'll give you an example for these Provider Green bean seeds. In high mowing, it was anywhere from 70 to 220 seeds in 1 ounce package, and that averages to about 145 seeds per ounce. Seed Savers Exchange had 75 listed, Territorial had 80, Johnny's had 85, So True had 90, Fedco 90, and Turtle Tree Seeds had 95 seeds per ounce. So based on those numbers, I would probably go with Seed Savers Exchange. The less number of seeds per ounce means that each individual seed is going to be more robust and vigorous and probably have more energy for growing. I also looked into lemon cucumbers because it seemed fairly common throughout a lot of catalogs. And I discovered that, again, seeds per ounce, Seed Savers Exchange had 700 listed. Territorial had anywhere from 713 to 855. Fedco and So True said 1,000 seeds per ounce. High Mowing said anywhere from 1,000 to 1,300. And Johnny said 1,262. So again, using those numbers, I would have gone with the Seed Savers Exchange that had 700 seeds per ounce, assuming that most of those seeds are going to be on the larger side. So for me, I have different things that I want to know about my seed suppliers. I personally want organic seeds. In a catalog where I can't talk to the person who grew the seeds, I want to see that it says certified organic. Once in a great while, I'll get non-organically produced seeds and just assume that I'm going to need to grow them out for a few years to kind of clean up the seed stock. I also am very interested in biodynamics. I don't know if anyone is familiar with biodynamics. No? Yeah, a little. All right. Biodynamics is a holistic, ecological, and environmental approach to farming and gardening and food and nutrition. It was developed by Rudolf Steiner in the 1920s. I call it ethereal gardening or ethereal growing. There's a very spiritual quality to the biodynamic farming. I have a couple of books about it up here if someone wants to take a look afterwards. This is the only catalog that I know of that's all biodynamically grown seeds. I know in the Fedco and the Seed Savers Exchange catalogs, sometimes you will see a BD designation in the description of their seeds. BD is telling you that it was a biodynamic grower. Biodynamic growers follow the lunar cycle, the moon cycle, to recommend when is a good time for planting things. Whether you're planting seeds or you're planting seedlings, there are certain parts of the moon's phase where it's better for root crops or better for leaf production or better for flowers and reproduction, fruit. And so they follow those planting calendars. I have one with me. It's called Stella Natura. And if you look in the calendar, each page shows you throughout the month all the phases of the moon, and it tells you the times of day that are optimal for planting certain crops, and certainly it tells you which days you can figure out blocks of days that are best for leaf crops or flowering and fruiting crops and so on. So I find that really fascinating. And I take any opportunity I can to try out Biodynamic Seeds because I feel like they're going above and beyond in the detail that they're putting into the quality of their soil and the quality of their plants. So I would definitely want to check those out. Another thing that I mentioned before is hybrids versus open pollinated versus the heirloom seeds. I personally prefer all open pollinated seeds. I'm very drawn to heirlooms because I love to help preserve the history and the culture of different varieties. From what I understand, I had a couple of professional seed savers come and do a talk here at the library in February, and they said you can absolutely save seeds from hybrids and grow them out. I had always heard, no, don't save hybrid seeds. I've even seen it printed in catalogs. And I think as long as you are open for an adventure and you have some extra space in the ground, why not? Save your hybrid seeds and plant them and see what you get. You will not get necessarily anything that was true to the type of the original plant you had in, but you'll see what the parents looked like and see all sorts of crosses, and you may be able to select some varieties out of that growing that really work for you or appeal to you, and so you can kind of select your own quality, depending on what your interests are. The heirloom seeds are not always open pollinated. They often are because they're much older varieties, but if you're really particular about wanting to grow something true to type that you can save your seeds, then look for the open pollinated. There's so many different catalogs out there. We do have some seed catalogs that are from right here in Connecticut in the New England area. There are many more seed producers out west and in other parts of the country. We do not have very many, especially organic seed producers here in the Northeast. And this is something I'd really love more people to be talking about with your seed companies, your seed catalogs, and requesting that they produce some more seeds for us in their offerings that are from here in the Northeast region. How many of you guys save your own seeds? Many people? Not too many? Okay. Pardon? You do too?
Just my beans.
Just your beans? Yeah. I have always enjoyed saving my seeds. It's kind of fun. It's kind of cool to have something that you grew in your own garden, and then you save it and then you grow it out again. I don't know, I just like that carrying forward. And there's a lot of towns. I think there's at least a dozen towns here in Connecticut that have seed libraries. Are you guys all aware of the one here? Have you all checked it out? Yeah. The other ones that I know of personally are at Berlin, the Peck Memorial Library has a seed library, and Stonington has the Wheeler, or North Stonington has the Wheeler Seed Library. And I believe there's quite a few towns in sort of the northwest part of the state. It seemed like there was a grouping of multiple seed libraries in that area. But those are a really great thing to check out as well. And if you're saving seeds, donate some of your seeds to them. Or if you have purchased too much, as some of us do when we go into a seed store, or we order in the catalogs and we go a little crazy and end up with way too many things that we don't have room for. So then it's good to be able to donate them to other people through a seed library. I know different seed libraries have different rules. I heard of one that they were very happy to loan the seeds out. They wanted you to take them and grow them, but they did not want you to then save seeds from those things and bring them back. I think they were concerned about cross-pollination, that people might not space things out as much as need to be. Maybe they were also worried about whether things would come back organic or having been exposed to certain types of pesticides, herbicides, fungicides. So for quality control, they were happy to move things along, but they did not necessarily want you to bring them back in. So I think it's interesting, and it's worth checking out a bunch of different of the seed libraries and see different ways you can patronize them. Another thing that you need to be aware of with selecting for quality is the genetics and epigenetics that are carried along in the seeds. I personally want, as I stated, the cleanest, most energetic seeds I can get. I also want seeds that are going to grow well for me here in Connecticut, in my climate, in my geology, my geography. We all do it. We buy seeds that came from producers out in Oregon or down in Texas or in North Carolina. The climate, the soil geology, everything, the soil biology is very different in those places. And so when we take seeds from there and we plant them here, which we all do, and we can do that, it's just one more thing that it's putting a little bit of a limit on the full potential that that seed might have reached if it stayed in the conditions that it was most familiar with. So it's just one more thing to think of as you go along your way. Another thing that's important for me, I don't want my seeds to carry any genetics where they've had to deal with fungicides, herbicides, pesticides. I want the cleanest seeds possible. I also want seeds that I would term not lazy. I want my seeds to hit my soil and instantly have a relationship with the biology in my soil, know how to feed themselves, know how to perform photosynthesis, and just be part of this holistic system. If seeds come from a grower that was irrigating, that was fertilizing, this seed probably came from a plant that had no idea how to feed and fend for itself. That's a concern of mine. I want my seeds to be out in nature and just do their thing. So, things you need to think about with your seeds. Culling seeds is really important. I have a package here that would be a great example of this if you want to take a look at it afterwards. I don't know how many of you do this, but when you get your seed packages, open them up and dump them out and sort them out, like with your Halloween candy. You pick out all the big ones. The biggest seeds are going to have the most energy. Each seed, you probably know, is like a little nutrient package that is there to feed that plant until it forms its first set of true leaves, and then it can switch over to photosynthesis and it can have this relationship with the biology and be feeding itself. When you dump out a seed packet, you're going to see a wide variety of sizes. You're going to see some that are shriveled, maybe some broken, some that should be nice and plump, might be flat or concave. I would not bother planting those. They are not going to be reaching the fullest potential, and I don't think they will produce the same level of nutrition that the plumpest, most nutrient-dense looking seeds are. So that's your first way of selecting for quality. I always inoculate my seeds. I don't know if anyone has heard of this. I think most people are familiar with legume inoculants. Many catalogs will offer bean and pea inoculants with those seeds. We feel that every seed should be inoculated. You are jump-starting the digestive system, the microbiome of your seeds. These seeds, when they start growing in the ground, need to have all sorts of diversity of bacteria and fungi, the mycorrhiza, and they need to have some nutrients in there. You can add these things right onto your seeds. So what I do is when I get my seed packages, I have some seed inoculant that I purchase. I've gotten some from Fedco, some from Lancaster Ag. Through the Bionutrient Food Association, we have a mineral depot, and we also offer some seed inoculants and biological products from there. I'm not a big run into the store shopper kind of a person, so it's possible that some of the local gardening stores may be having products like this. You want to look for microbial seed inoculants or mycorrhizal seed inoculants, seed guard, they'll come under different names. The ones that I have are mycorrhizal fungi spores, and they have some beneficial bacteria, and they also have some kelp and some other like powdered rock mineral nutrients mixed in with them. This is like instant food for your little seedling when it first starts to grow. So literally this little bag here will do about 100 pounds of seeds. You take a tiny pinch and you put it into your seed packet, close the packet, give it a little shake, there you go. Your seeds are inoculated. This inoculant will not activate until it gets wet. So as long as you keep your seeds in a place that's dry, that seed inoculant will last for up to a few years. I think after 2 or 3 years it's going to lose its effectiveness, and if you save your seeds for longer, which many seeds are viable for 5 and 10 years if you store them correctly, you would want to reapply your inoculant. If you like to store your seeds in the freezer or refrigerator, I would not recommend inoculating your seeds ahead, because when you are taking the seeds in and out of the freezer or refrigerator, there may be some moisture that gets in there, a little condensation, and that will ruin the effectiveness. It'll activate your inoculant when you're not ready to use it. So you can also put the inoculant on right at the time of planting. I also know people who will take an inoculant like this and will dip their little rooted seedling in that. Garlic, before you plant your garlic bulbs, you can dip that and put it in, because you are now adding that inoculant of the different biology along with your seed. Another thing that I feel is really important is looking at the different types of containers. I personally don't like to use things if I don't know exactly what the source of them was. Peat pots and cow pots. What did that cow eat? Where did that manure come from? I don't know if I want a pot, if I don't know what it was made of. I need to know everything about my food, like personally. So I like to use a soil blocker. I don't know if anyone's familiar with one of these. I used to use one of these groovy little gadgets, little wood thing with newspaper, just use the local valley paper, and I would make lots of little paper pots. I would always make them much deeper than the standard peat pots or little plastic tray pots that you can get, figuring that way give my roots a little more room to grow down. But I found that now that I have 8,000 square feet of garden to work with, I don't have time to be making a lot of paper pots. So for me, it's much faster to work with a soil blocker. These do come in different sizes. This one I got from Johnny's a few years back. I understand Fruition now carries them. I believe they were selling at the Connecticut Flower and Garden Show down in Hartford this winter. And I'm pretty sure you can find more of these available online. And what's great about these is it's self-contained, a little cube of soil, but you don't have any walls or anything. You also don't have to be taking things out of plastic. So in order to use a blocker, you need to have soil that has decent clay in it, because that will help hold it together. And again, I need to know everything about where my food is coming from. I need to know personally. I read the packages, and I would hope you all do too. When you go to the gardening store to pick out your potting soil, don't just go with, oh, Dr. Earth, that's a great one, or whatever the brand name happens to be. Always read the package and find out what's on it. Oftentimes our potting soils have different types of nutrients mixed into them that may be plant-based, maybe animal-based, maybe mineral-based. I'm concerned about the animal-based ones, the blood meal, the bone char, things of that nature. Are those coming from organically raised animals, or are they coming from confined animal feed operations, which is not an industry that I want to support? And I'm also concerned about what those animals were fed, what medications they may have had to take in the course of their life. And I don't want those things in a product that my plant is going to be taking up as food, because then I'll be ingesting it. So I'm very careful about where I source my materials. My goal for this year was to make my own potting soil, but I've run out of time, so I had to buy a prepackaged product. But one of the books that, a lot of you have heard of Elliot Coleman. He has a couple different recipes in this book, and probably some other gardening books you're familiar with. You can find recipes for making your own seed starting mix or potting soils. And I think it's really worth looking into, because again, you're selecting for quality every step of the way. You can bump up the quality with each of these parts of the process. So the soil that I happen to be using is something that I got from Fedco. It's called Fort V, and it's specifically made to work with a blocker. And you guys have probably all done this before, so I really don't show you too crazily. But you want your soil wet enough that you make a ball with it and you throw it up. It shouldn't break all apart. This probably could have taken a little bit more moisture, but oh well. I mean, you should be able to do like that. There we go. And if this was a block, a soil block, you see that it's going to hold together really well. So I start out, and no matter what I use for seed starting mix, sometimes if I run out of what I have purchased, I'll buy some from Darren Hall at the farm, and he purchases in these huge bales, these 60-quart bales of organic seed starting medium. And whether I'm using that or whether I'm using this one that is fortified with different nutrients, I still add my own blend of mineral nutrients. This is a sample here on the table of what is in some of the different bags that I have over there. As part of the Bionutrient Food Association Mineral Depot, we offer a number of different naturally mined rock minerals, and some of them are locally mined here in Connecticut, and they are the best food source for the biology in our soil. It's familiar to them. We here in Connecticut are surrounded by basalt ridges, and there's also high calcium lime that is mined here in Connecticut, and these are fantastic products for feeding our soil biology and for feeding our plants. In this particular mix that I have basalt, I have something called desert dynamine, that's a naturally mined mineral. I have Tennessee brown rock phosphate, zeolites, which are like a little volcanic glass almost, kelp, high calcium lime, carbonatite, Menifee humates, and azomite. You don't need to put 10 different things into your mineral mix. I happen to have all this available in my garage, so little of this, little of that, like when you're making a pot of soup and you just throw stuff in. And that's what I came up with. One of the handouts that I have has a few different versions of recipes for seed starting amendment. If you guys are interested, make sure you grab one of the handouts. And actually, if you want to take a look at some of these things, I put them, grab one and pass it back. Grab one and pass it back. And those are labeled to, if you open it out, you can see the different minerals that are in there, and they're labeled so you can tell what it is. Another thing that I add to my seed starting soil, along with the minerals, is worm compost. Does anyone here do vermicomposting or worm composting? No one has a worm bin?
Tried it.
Tried it?
My kids played in it.
Oh, goody. So worm compost is a fantastic thing because it contains not only the nutrients of the food products that the worms consumed, but it also contains biology, the bacteria and organisms from their digestive tracts. So it's adding more living organisms to your digestive system of your plants. And then, my seeds are inoculated. So what I do is I take if anyone's not seen one of these before, basically just cram the soil into it. And it goes a little quicker at home because I can use a bigger bin, and then I can just kind of sweep the blocker through, and then I'll pack it quick with my hand and then put it on a flat surface like my counter and just kind of mash on it, and that really pushes the soil up inside of it. And then when it is full enough, all you do is spring load. Let's hope I jammed that in hard enough. So then you just take it and you punch them out, and you have all these nice little blocks. And it goes pretty quick once you get a rhythm going. And so I can fit a row of 5 by 10 in one of these trays, so I can get 50 little seedlings in here. And they don't fall apart. Over the season of watering it, the first time I will water from above, and it helps to seal up because there is a tiny little depression here where you drop your seed. So the first time I'll water from above, and it just helps to move a little soil to cover my seed. But then after that, I'll water from beneath. I'll fill the tray below. And so these blocks don't fall apart at all. And they're really easy to take apart. Come planting time, I use a little cookie spatula and just pop them out and put them in the ground. And I don't have to worry about lots of little pots and plastic and all that sort of thing. So I find it much more efficient.
So you just plant it once and then into the ground?
Yep. And what's great is because I've added these different rock minerals, when that little seed starts to sprout, and I've got this little seedling right there in its immediate root zone, are these naturally mined rock minerals that I kind of refer to them as time-released nutrients, because they're not, some of them are water soluble, but most of them are rock minerals that need the biology in the soil to convert them to a form the plant can take up. So it's like having a little pantry right there in their immediate root zone, right from the very beginning. So it's easy access food. And it will be there throughout the growing season. Even as I'm addressing the mineral deficiencies in the rest of my garden from the soil test results, and I continue to work on getting that up to a really good level. At least I know that right there in my seeds, immediate root zone, they've got food that they can use. And I have noticed a really big difference. I've always started a lot of my own seeds. I've also bought some at the store, but I'd say probably for about 5 or 10 years now, I don't buy seedlings anymore. I really prefer starting my own. I find that they do much better. And I notice a big difference. Since I've started adding these different amendments to my seed starting soil, the seedlings themselves grow much more robustly. I mean, the leaves of the little baby plants almost have a sheen to them. They're thicker. They feel hardier, and they grow at a really good rate. So I think it really makes a big difference. Last year at the farm, I started a bunch of basil plants at my house, and one of the girls who worked at the farm started a bunch of basil plants there in their greenhouse. And then we planted them all out in a section of our garden on the same day. My plants had been started in the soil that I had amended, and her plants had been started in just potting soil, organic potting soil right out of the bag. And her plants looked perfectly fine, but my plants just looked a little bit deeper green and a little bit more robust. And we put them into the ground, and they were anywhere from a ½ inch to, say, an inch and a half tall. They were really small when we put them out. And my basil plants grew at a faster rate, and by the end of the season, or by harvest time, the plants that I had started were much larger and had much more growth, and the growth itself was just really sturdier. There was a definite difference. So it's really worth the investment of the time to do these things. You'll see the benefits. Let's see. So when you have started your seedlings, another way that you can select for quality is culling your seedlings. We talked about culling your seeds, where you select out just the biggest. When you start your seedlings in your tray, if it says on the seed package that your seeds are going to germinate in 7 to 10 or 7 to 14 days, you may notice by day 3 that some of your seeds have already sprouted. Those are keepers. Day 4, day 5, you find that some more of your seeds have sprouted. Those are keepers. Those seeds are exhibiting a vigor of growth, and those are the ones that have a really good energy and growth trajectory, so those are really important. Anything that doesn't sprout until day 7 or even after day 7, unless I really desperately needed those plants, I would not likely use them. So I would almost recommend start more seed trays or start more seed pots than you actually need, and only plant the best, the fastest growing, the most vigorous looking plants. And then the other ones, eat them as microgreens. Throw them in your salad, and reuse the seed starting soil. But select for quality each step of the way. Let's see. So when to start your seeds, there's a lot of information online. And maybe you guys, does anyone test their soil temperature, or do you just have that, oh gosh, I really need to go out and play in the dirt, I'm going to go plant stuff. That's what most of us do. It's really important to wait until the soil is warm enough so that you don't have your plants go into transplant shock. And there are lots of great charts online. It seems that the optimal temperatures that most plants want is anywhere above 70 degrees for germination. Wow. So, I mean, with a seedling, I know, here in Connecticut, how's that going to work? So it's important to be careful which crops you're putting out in the spring. We all try and rush the tomatoes and the peppers. We want those summer crops much earlier than they really want to grow. So embrace kale and spinach and arugula and the things that like the colder weather, and let those have their chance before you go crazy with the tomatoes and the peppers. The least amount of time in pots or containers, the better. As I said before, when the plants first start making their little roots and they're sending them out, that plant is stretching out to cover as much real estate as it possibly can, because that's its feeding area. And if it touches another plant of a similar variety, it's limiting it. Like if you have your tomatoes 2-3 feet apart, when those tomato roots meet up against each other, it's a signal to those plants, stop growing in that direction. There's somebody already there. I can't get nutrients there. And so you've now limited how far it can grow. So we recommend pretty much double whatever it says on the package or in the catalog. If it tells you to plant something 2 to 3 feet apart, put it 5 or 6 feet apart. But this is where companion planting comes in. Out in nature, you don't see monocropping. Nothing's in little straight rows and just individual. Everything is mixed together. There's diversity. And the diversity is beneficial to the plants above as well as below ground. Most people are familiar with, plant oregano or basil near your tomatoes because it keeps the bug away. It's really important to have a diversity of plantings, different types of plants all mixed together in the same areas, because you're now inviting that much more diversity into the biology in your soil, and everyone's feeding everyone down there, so it really benefits all the plants. The companion planting, one of my favorite, I don't know if everyone's seen this book, Carrots Love Tomatoes, and what was the other one? Roses Love Garlic, I think, is her sequel. This is by Louise Riott. It's an older book, but I know it's been reprinted. It has a different cover on it now. You can also find a lot of charts online about companion planting. It's being talked about more. People have recognized the value of it. And so there's a lot more information on it and a lot more combinations that you can try. At the farm, we tried to go anywhere from 5 to 10 varieties in any given planting area. How we laid out the garden over there is 4 foot by 10 foot beds, or 4 foot by 10 foot sections, and each section was planted a little differently. And for example, in one bed I had potatoes and borage, I had kale, I had celery, and I had bush beans, and I had maybe a couple of marigolds. Now, you don't want to have celery like jammed on top of each other. You want to space out the celeries, but you can put a bean plant in between each one, and you want to spread out your potatoes so your potato plants will get nice and big, but you can stick a borage here and there. I mean, you can mix these things together so that you're using your ground space efficiently, especially if you just have a couple of raised beds and you have limited space. You don't want to have 2 tomato plants and then say, oh well, I can't plant anything else. You can still use that ground space, just add more varieties to it. Mixing in perennials with your annuals is a fantastic idea. Keeping living roots in the ground all year round keeps up the activity of the biology in your soil. It keeps that nutrient cycling going all year round. Some people will use cover crops, but if you just have some perennials mixed in, that suffices as well. I tried to mix herbs, flowers, vegetables, even fruit. I had tomatoes and strawberries growing in the same section, and I tried to mix flowers and herbs in everywhere that I possibly could. Aiming for different heights of plants is really helpful too. You want to have some that are really big and broad leafy, and then you want others that are smaller. So maybe alternating root crops with the larger leafy plants is a good idea. To look into the different combinations. So some of the minerals that I have in my blend, I'll just give you a brief explanation of some of them or why I chose those particular ones. The basalt, again, is locally mined. I feel it's important for me not to have to go really far to get implements, things for my garden, for my food. I like to source locally as much as possible, and to me it made sense. If basalt is a natural mineral here in our state, then of course the critters in my soil are going to recognize this as a food source. And the basalt is actually one of the best things to use because it has one of the widest ranges of minerals and trace elements of any of the rock minerals. Azomite is similar to basalt. It is, I don't know where it's mined, it's something that I got through Fedco, and the name is the A to Z of minerals and trace elements. If you had to pick one or the other, I'd go with the basalt over the azomite. They're very similar in how they'll perform. Tennessee brown rock phosphate is again naturally mined. It increases photosynthesis and it increases the bricks, giving insect and disease resistance. I don't know if you are familiar with bricks at all. This is a tool called a refractometer. It tests the percentage of solids that are dissolved in the sap of a plant. And so when you're looking at the juice of a tomato or the juice of a kale leaf, and when you look inside of this, you will see what looks like graduated numbers, like on a thermometer. And you can find charts online that explain about the bricks readings, and there are numbers that will tell you if your plant sap is testing out as poor quality, average quality, good quality, or excellent quality. And so when you test your plant sap, the higher the number, the better. I know for anything that's a leaf, you want it to bricks at 12% or higher. That means 12% of that sap is actually solids, which will be the sugars and the minerals, the nutrients that that plant is creating. So any minerals and any food sources that I can give to my plants that are going to help bump up my bricks levels, that's what I want, because that's where my nutrition and my health is going to come from. Dynamin is from out west. It's got a lot of clay. It's an excellent source of minerals and trace elements. A lot of these are great sources of calcium. The one thing with the soil chemistry, though, is, even these are naturally mined rock minerals. If you already have very high levels of calcium in your soil, you don't want to be dumping more product into your soil that's going to add more calcium. There's a certain chemistry to the soil that's important to keep in mind. And there's many great books that give suggestions on helping you figure these things out. The Intelligent Gardener is one that we use. Here's another one called The Ideal Soil. If you are familiar with the Acres Publishing Company, they have a lot of really great videos on biological growing and regenerative farming, things for gardening and farming. Very helpful. Through the Bionutrient Food Association, our executive director also teaches about soil science. He does a 2-day workshop on the principles of biological systems, and he will teach you how to interpret your own soil test results. You'll know what all the different minerals are, what their functions are, and what levels need to be in your soil so that you can then interpret your own soil test results. Seed saving is something that I would highly encourage everyone to try, even if you just start out with beans, or beans and peas are pretty easy to save seeds from. Certain other things like carrots and beets, cabbages, they get trickier because they don't produce seeds in their first year of growth. You have to have them winter over, and then they'll produce seeds the next year. Flowers are great. Zinnias and marigolds are super easy. Nasturtiums, very easy to save seeds from. And you'll be able to select for your own quality. These will be seeds that grew in your garden, in your soil, with your nutrients and amendments you've added, and the biology that is familiar to right there in your yard. And so you are improving the quality of the foods that you'll be able to grow for your family. So I think that's pretty much it. Does anyone have any questions?
From 2 years ago, I'm neighbors with Darren, and I was at one of your presentations at his farm. You had started to use seaweed. You had brought seaweed up?
Yes.
How did that work for you?
Really good. One of the things that we have done in looking for natural sources of amendments, the soil there was in really rough shape, and it desperately needed organic matter added to it. Roots in the ground is one of the best ways to get organic matter in the soil, because then as the roots break down, the little critters in the soil can consume them. We needed to bring in, we were in a hurry, we didn't want to wait to have roots. So we went down to Stonington, and we got, I think it was eelgrass and some composted seaweed from a friend of ours that has a farm down there. It's called Coogan Farm. It's at the Denison Pequot Seapost Nature Center. They have a place called the Giving Garden. Have you heard of it?
Yes.
It's an amazing operation. Check them out online. If you get a chance to go and visit this place, it's absolutely magical. They are producing, I think, close to 15,000 pounds of food on roughly an acre. All of it is donated to local food banks. It's an amazing, amazing place. It's called the Giving Garden. It's at Coogan Farm, which is part of the Denison Pequot Seapost Nature Center, which is actually in Mystic. It's right near the Mystic Seaport and Mystic Village. We're friends with the farmer there, Craig Floyd, and he very generously let me come down with my pickup truck and get a load.
My grandmother was a huge gardener, and they retired on the Cape, and she had a huge garden, and what they did was they would mulch with seaweed.
Yeah.
So they would, when I say they would put it between the plants to prevent the weed growth, and then it would eventually work into the soil. And their garden was great.
Yeah. Yep, it's a great amendment to add. I don't know about taking it directly from the beach or directly from the ocean and piling that around your plants. I'd be worried about the amount of salt. So yeah, I would let it compost a little bit or let it dry out before I added it. You don't want to go crazy putting too much salt around your plants. But it is a fantastic soil amendment. It's loaded with nitrogen and other nutrients. And actually, seawater is one of the best things to use. Sea salt is a great amendment to use. Again, in moderation, you don't need to use a little bit. A little bit goes a long way, because seawater is naturally complete balance of minerals and trace elements.
Do you have a place locally that to have soil tested that you'd recommend? You've mentioned one in Ohio, but is there anything?
The only local labs I know of are the Yukon Extension, and the reason I would not recommend that lab is because they don't test for a wide enough range of the minerals and trace elements. When I was having issues with my garden, if I was relying on the local Extension soil test, I never would have found out about my boron problem, and so I still wouldn't be able to grow.
What was the name of the one in Ohio?
Logan Labs in Ohio. Yeah, there are other labs around. If you go online, you can look up and find, I don't know the names of all of them, but I know you can find other labs. There may be some more local. We do have Harrington's Organic Land Care in Bloomfield. They do soil testing. I think they may do a slightly different form of testing than what Logan Labs does. I know that Todd Harrington, who is the owner at Harrington's Land Care, he studied with Elaine Ingham, and she is all about the soil biology and the soil food web. So I think there are differences from one lab to another.
He does a great job, and I know him personally. He's always doing research.
Yeah.
So I would go to him.
Heritage?
Yeah. He has an organic lawn care company, but he also does a lot of research too.
Yes, he does. And he also carries products like the worm compost, and he composts different locally sourced, the leaves and the wood mulch, and they inoculate. He has a lot of different products that you can look into. You can check out their website. I think I have some of his business cards here if anyone wants one. The worm compost that I have with me today is from Wiggle Room, which is a business down the Bridgeport area. Are you familiar with Wiggle Room? No? Oh, okay. It happened to be a friend of mine who has this worm composting business, and I ran into her one day and said, oh yeah, I'm doing this program. Do you have any worm compost I can grab? So, but we do have a local source as well.
I have another question to ask you. I have horses, and I have piles of horse manure, which I've chosen not to use in my gardens. I don't give my horses I had a couple horses that I gave wormers to, and they get shots, and they use, horses get a lot of stuff in their bodies.
Right.
How long, I know a lot of farmers around here go to different farms around here and get horse manure. How long does it take? And they also, you got to be careful of what the bedding has in it, because sometimes that comes from, how long does it take for all that stuff to actually work out? Does it ever work out?
I can't quantify exactly how long it takes, but there's hope, because I went to a lecture over the weekend. Was anyone here at Holcomb Farm to hear Dr. Stephanie Seneff and Dr. Don Huber and Dr. Lauren Pang? All right, on Saturday they did a talk there, and they were talking specifically about the effects of glyphosate on the health of animals and plants and humans. Glyphosate is the active ingredient in Roundup, which is more prevalently used than most of us realize. It's used in our food industry in ways that are horrifying. It is used as a desiccant to dry grain and legume crops at the time of harvest or just before harvest. Because rather than a farmer waiting for something, a whole field of something to dry naturally, and what if it rains and that messes you up, they'll just spray this product as a desiccant, dry everything evenly, and then boom, they harvest. So you need to be really careful.
And also what you feed your horses.
Well, exactly.
I don't
That's
get
what I was
organic
going to
horse
say.
grain. So how can a farmer be called organic if he's using manure from horse farms?
That's something you need to talk with the USDA about.
Because
and
I
whoever
have
sets
a
the
real
organic
issue
standards.
with that.
Right.
Because
Right.
I'm not going to say anything, but I can't eat food when I know that it's been grown in that
Right.
stuff.
Right.
I just
That's
can't do it.
exactly how I feel.
I won't do it.
I do not trust the organic label
Absolutely not.
anymore because it has
Nope.
been used for too many different things, and it doesn't mean what it used to mean.
Nope.
Certified organic gives you some level of security, but I really prefer to know my sources personally. If I can call someone up or stop by and talk to them, that's how I'm going to choose the inputs.
I mean, I've used a hoof thing on my horse's feet that says, do not use on animal. I don't use it anymore, but I used to use it. It was a
Yeah.
thrush medicine. So don't ever use on an animal that might be consumed.
Yeah.
I mean, the stuff that, and there are show barns around here.
Oh,
The
yes.
stuff they put in their horse, they have to put
Right.
daily wormers in their horses.
Yeah.
And that manure, most of the vegetables that are grown around here are grown in that manure.
Right. And
It's scary
one of the
to me.
biggest problems with the manures that come from these animals that are fed the GMO corn and soy and
Yeah.
alfalfa and, fed these different chemical products, all of those things act as antibiotics. They're antibacterial. They're killing off the bacteria in the digestive system of the horse. And so when you take those manures from the cows, horses, whatever, and put that in your garden, you are killing the bacteria. You are
Yeah.
killing the microbiome of your plants. You are making it so that they cannot have a chance at feeding themselves, and you'll be forced to fertilize. So that's why I said you
Yeah.
really need to ask a lot of questions, read labels, and just be careful about sourcing. But what I was saying about this talk that I went to over the weekend, there really is hope, because they were talking about, from the testing that they've been involved in, lactobacillus bacteria, acetobacter, which is found in raw apple cider vinegar, and a product that's similar to zeolites. It's a naturally mined volcanic glass almost. Those things are really effective at drawing out and breaking the chemical bond that the glyphosate has. And so it is my personal belief, even before I went to this lecture, for every toxin that we've created, that we're throwing out in our soil or into our feed system, there is something in nature that can counteract this, that can either neutralize it or somehow break these chemical bonds. There's some amazing work being done with mycorrhizal fungi. If you want to look up Paul Stamets and mycoremediation, there's some amazing work being done. I was reading something the other day, and I found a great YouTube video about how with parking lots, where there's runoff from the parking lots and these petroleum products, they're making a buffer of wood chips that are inoculated with oyster mushroom spores, and the oyster mushrooms are actually able to take in these toxic pollutants and neutralize it, so that it no longer travels into wetland areas or into other adjoining areas. And there are certain plants that you can put in. I know sunflowers are a great bioremediator. I'm drawing a blank. I know there's other ones. But there are certain plants that are called bioaccumulators. They naturally take in and hold on to certain chemicals and make it so that those chemicals are altered, so that they're not as damaging or maybe neutralized. So there's a lot of things that we can be learning about. That it's awfully hard to find manure these days that's clean and safe that you can put into your soil. But if there are things that you can add, bumping up the biology, that will help to break these chemicals up, then we can make those products safe again.
Well, I just know I had a pile from just the manure I picked up in my fields, these were horses that weren't getting stuff, and I tossed it in a pile, and it I didn't ever use it, but let me tell you the stuff that grew out of it was unbelievable. But a lot of it you have to be careful, because they eat hay and the seeds are in that. So it was a really weedy stuff.
See, but that doesn't bother me. I consider weeds nature's cover crop.
Yeah.
And actually, I've done a little bit of studying up. I'm starting to learn more about Korean natural farming. I don't know if anyone has heard of this. I have a book on it right here, and there's tons of great information online. Korean natural farming was introduced to me by Nigel and Joan Palmer at the Institute of Sustainable Nutrition. And Korean natural farming is really addressing the soil biology and the nutrient cycling that can happen with your soil biology. They use fermented plant juices. Here I have some dandelions that I fermented. This is the juice of purslane that I fermented. This is calcium phosphorus, that is another thing I learned from this. It's basically eggshells that I roasted until they were super brittle, and then I put them in a jar and I filled them to cover. So you have about a third of eggshell broken up, and then fill it the rest of the way with raw apple cider vinegar. That's why this is out here. This will dissolve all those minerals out of the eggshells, and you can then dilute this and use this as a foliar feed or as a drench on your soil. Molasses is another great thing to use for feeding your soil biology and feeding your plants. I find that if I ever see powdery mildew starting up in my garden, I'll immediately take my foliar sprayer. Is everyone familiar with one of those? Foliar spraying, it's like misting your plants. So I have a foliar tank that holds about 2.5 gallons. I'll add a couple of spoonfuls of molasses, and I'll add a quarter to a half a cup of raw organic milk, and then I'll fill it the rest of the way with water, and I'll go out and I'll spray my plants, and it nips that powdery mildew in the bud, and it goes away. I've had it start up in my pumpkin patch because in the property where I have my garden has a lot of big trees around it, and so there's not as much airflow. Things get a little stagnant, and that sort of helps set up conditions for these mildews and things. And also, as I'm working on addressing the health of my soil and the health of my plants, I'm still having some of these pest pressures and different diseases hitting my plants, but I see them lessening the more that I remineralize and amend my soil. I'm having less problems. So anyway, Korean natural farming is something you should check out online. It's using native local inputs, simple things. Growing healthy food should not have to cost you a lot of money. You shouldn't have to buy a ton of products. This should be pretty easy. Question?
It looks like we really don't have a lot of weeds.
No. We used a lot of mulch. I don't mind some weeds. There are certain ones that I don't want growing, so I'll cut those right down at ground level. I don't pull them out. I want to leave the roots in the ground because the roots will die and feed the biology in the soil, so I'll just cut those ones super short. If they can't do photosynthesis and can't start making sugars to feed themselves, then those ones will die off. But certain things like purslane and chickweed, I love those. Those are low-growing ground covers. The more you can keep your soil covered to keep it moist, that encourages a really healthy population of biology in your soil. They like it dark and they like it damp. For when we first started the garden, this was actually the patch of ground. You can see a little bit of dead weeds there, but there was a lot of bare ground. There was nothing, not even the weeds wanted to grow there. We did find that we had a lot of clover, and we had mugwort and a couple other things that were coming up in places, a lot of dock. Certain things I like dandelions are fantastic with that long taproot. They are actually mining minerals from down in the subsoil and bringing it up into the root zone of your plants. So certain things like that, I don't mind in my garden. I'll trim out the ones if they're in a place where I need something to be planted, but I consider them companion plants. And frankly, dandelions are edible. They're highly nutritious. They're one of the first foods for our pollinators that come out in the spring. So encourage your neighbors to leave a few dandelions.
I have a whole yard of them. My whole front yard is dandelions.
Nothing wrong with that.
Okay, I won't pull them out.
No, they're good. They're good. And also what we need to understand is that weeds grow in a particular place for a reason. They don't just come up randomly. They like the conditions in that patch of ground. The chemistry of the ground in that space is what makes specific weeds grow there. My understanding is that most weeds grow in calcium deficient soils. If there's a high presence of calcium and the other nutrients that make the calcium available to your plants, weeds aren't going to be happy there. I know at my own garden at home, where I do have very high levels of calcium, I don't have as many weeds as we were seeing over at the farm.
Well, that sort of leads to my question. Most soils in Connecticut are highly acidic, meaning that they're calcium deficient. So I was surprised in your soil chemistry discussion, you never discussed pH of the soil.
My understanding with pH is that it's very variable. The pH in your soil can change from hour to hour because soil is not static. The biology in the soil is constantly on the move. The nutrients are being cycled and moved around at all times. So I could test the same piece of ground every hour of the day, and I'm going to possibly get a different reading each time. I know I've seen charts online where it shows the range of pH, and it has the list of the mineral nutrients that you want in your soil, and it will show, at this pH, there's not as much of this mineral available, and then at this pH, it's most available, and then it recedes again. I think those numbers were derived by looking at each one individually and not necessarily how they work with each other. And so it's my understanding that soil pH should not be your highest criteria. You should really be looking more at balancing your soil chemistry, and your pH will kind of fall into line. And it will be different, like I said, depending on what's going on with your soil biology and how your nutrients are cycling. So, I imagine if your soil is really far at either end of the spectrum, that's telling you that there is a problem, but it can be addressed through the mineral nutrients. So,
I'm new to the area, so can you just give a quick timeline on when you usually start your seeds and when you think kind of is the ideal time to plant? I'm moving from Florida, so it's totally different. So what would be like your, because I have no idea at this point.
I try to not keep my seedlings indoors for more than like 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, I'll put my seeds in the trays, and by the end of 1 week, whatever has sprouted is what I'm going to use. So I start counting from that point. And from that point, anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks growth, and I want it out in my garden.
And when is that usually? When are you putting it out in your garden?
For myself this year, I'm not starting anything until right after Easter. And that's when I'll start up my spring greens. I'm going to try and direct seed more this year than I've always done a lot of direct seeding, but I'm going to try to do even more. I have found that in my garden at home, and even at the farm, I let things go to seed in the fall. I don't cut my plants down. I leave everything to die back, and so a lot of things are actually self-seeding. At home, I have a carpet of spinach. I have not had to plant spinach for a few years now. Dill. I have arugula. I even have a carpet of tomatoes. I have a couple different varieties of tomatoes that just come back on their own. So in noticing when those things start sprouting has really brought it to my attention that it does make sense to wait a little bit longer before I put my plants out, because they're just going to hit the ground running and grow faster. Whereas if I start putting things out in March and April, as some people do, the soil's just too cold. The soil biology is not even awake. It's still asleep from the winter. Nobody's home to feed my plants. They're just not going to grow quickly. It's going to slow down their growth. And I don't believe that once you've slowed a plant down that much, I don't believe that it picks up right where it left off. You've really set it back.
So you're going to start planting next week?
Yes, I'm going to go over to the farm and check it out and see if things are starting to sprout over there. And I might start planting my peas and probably put in some arugula, spinach,
What about like broccoli
lettuces.
or any like those type of things? Do you wait?
The broccoli, cabbages, things like that, those I will start indoors, and it'll be sometime right after Easter that I'll start
Do you use
doing
like
my trays.
heat, do you use heat mats, or you do?
I never used to. I used to just start my seedlings in a south-facing window, and our house was pretty warm, so I figured, oh well, you're going to do what you're going to do. It wasn't really successful. Last year I did buy some LED lights. I got some that are bar type lights that are white, and then I bought 2 that are round colored lights because I was curious. I wanted to see the difference. Wasn't really familiar with either of them. I gotta say, I did notice a difference. The colored lights, those plants were stockier. They grew really well. And the ones with the white LED lights, they grew really well also, just not as well. The ones with the colored lights did make a difference. As far as heat mats, we heat our house with a wood stove, so I can keep my seed trays in the basement near the wood stove, and that's all the heat source they need. When it gets to the point where it's too hot in the house with the wood stove and we shut it down, then I do have a few seedling mats that I'll put down on my seed racks where I'm starting my seeds, and so I'll have a heat source. But I try to not have to do that too much. I've also had really good luck starting seeds outdoors, right at the foundation of my house. My house is south facing, and we have stone all around the base of the house, so I can almost set up a little mini tent with clear plastic and just put my seedling trays right on the ground there. It's super warm from the solar radiation, and even though it gets cold overnight, it hasn't seemed to hurt it. For any of the greens, lettuces, kales, arugula, spinach, those sprout really, really well outside like that.
Cold weather crops.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yeah. Now, like with my tomatoes, I'm not going to plan on putting my tomatoes in until at least mid-May, if not later. It really depends on, I mean, who can tell with the weather around here?
You're saying, when you say put in, you mean
I mean, put
in
the
ground
seedlings
outdoors?
outside.
Yes.
So I'm not going to start my tomatoes until probably later in April.
Indoors.
Indoors,
Indoors.
yes.
And
Yeah.
put them out like Mother's Day, mid-May.
Yeah, or maybe
Mid to
even a
late
little
May.
bit later. I'm going to wait a little bit later.
I mean, growing up, and I grew up in Western Massachusetts, it was always don't plant outdoors. Don't plant your tomatoes or your annual flowers until Memorial Day. Connecticut seems to be push it earlier, closer to Mother's Day. But Memorial Day was always the
Yep.
big planting weekend.
Yeah.
Except for
Yeah.
the peas.
Except for peas.
Well, I
That's
still
right.
can't
Peas
get over
and
that.
Spinach,
Putting
radishes.
your peas, what is it? Plant your peas by St. Patrick's Day? I don't see how that would work around here. There is still so much snow packed there, frozen ground. So I have brought with me some of the rock minerals and some seed inoculant and some of the vermicompost if anyone is interested. I have it for sale at my cost. The Bionutrient Food Association is a nonprofit, and as such, anything that I have that I offer to people is just to cover my cost of it. So if anyone is interested, you can take a look. And I have my seed rack over here, which some of you were able to look at earlier. I have been saving seeds from our biological demonstration garden for the past 2 years, and I package them up and I give them out everywhere I go to share what I'm growing, and also to help encourage other people to save their seeds as well. So check it out and help yourself to a few packages. There are some handouts over there that explain the processes that we used in growing our biological demonstration garden. And I mentioned earlier, which some of you may have missed, that the garden is going to be open this summer. I'm going to have open garden hours every Tuesday from July and August from 2 o'clock until dark. The George Hall Farm has a CSA that has their pickup on Tuesdays, and last summer I had opened up the garden for the CSA families to come up and do a U-pick with the flowers and certain other things that I had, and it was really, really nice. The people really enjoyed it, and I liked answering their questions, so I thought I would just have it open to the general population. So if you want to
wonderful.
come and check it out.
All right, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.